Let's get started. So welcome everyone to the 10th edition of the Virtual Los Angeles User Group. The future is here. So in this session, we'll be talking about the new things that are coming to the Sitecore space, the things that have recently changed. We're gonna have a short discussion first and ideate around how the few acquisitions and the things that we see happening in the Sitecore space are going to affect the future of the platform. And then we have two great sessions lined up. One by Varun Nehra, who's here with us right now. He's going to walk us through the Jamstack with Sitecore Experience Edge. And then we have Shyba, who's going to tell us how to make our websites lightning fast.
I'm so glad I'm not going after Alex. I can screw up all the way through, and then Alex will come in and just correct everything and set the record straight. So.
Nah.
Alex is going to be giving those the stink eyes the whole way through. So before we get going, what I'd like you guys to do is I just shared a link in the chat. Let's take a minute and click on that link and fill out a quick survey. It's 4 questions, simple questions. And then we'll take a look at the results and discuss a couple of items from that list, and that will kick us off. I'll give everyone 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes.
There should be a yes, no, and a maybe in here.
We're not maybe people.
Yes or no. Are you in or are you out?
Yep. If you're just slightly leaning one way, it's one or the other. And some of the topics of today's sessions are giving away some things in a way. All right, 1 more minute. Ten seconds. All right. Let me share the screen. Let's see where we are. All right. Can you guys see my screen? Browser?
Nope.
Nope.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
How about now?
Yep.
Better.
All right. Let's refresh. Oh, interesting. Even on the box ever and XDB. That's a tie. Okay. Okay. So the first question was, will box ever replace the XDB? So we have 5, 6, and 6. It's a tie. Will Order Cloud by 451 replace Sitecore Experience Commerce? The majority saying yes. Okay, where do you see Sitecore development moving to? SXAJS says Jamstack is leaning. All the above is right behind it. Okay. And then let's see here. Sitecore isn't likely finished with acquisitions. Where do you think we'll see more investments? There's content. Someone thinks that they got everything they need. Managed solar. That coming from Sursex guys by any chance? Microsite development. Okay. All right. Cloud vendor exclusivity. Okay. More commerce stuff. Interesting. More commerce stuff. Marketing automation. Okay. No idea. Vectron. That's unexpected. Vectron. All right. So why don't we talk about the first two here? And this is going to be an open forum. I'll stop sharing the screen. I want you guys, everyone, to participate. So Sitecore recently acquired BoxEver and 451, right? It's no longer a secret. BoxEver is, for those who aren't familiar, is a CDP platform. It's ultimately what the XDB strive to be. Right? This is where the thinking behind the XDB was. It's XDB on steroids. It has the CDP functionality in it. It has decisioning functionality, and it's all sorts of good things that come with it. So because we got a tie, we'll probably spend more time on this one. So there's some conflicting information around in the community. Will BoxEver replace XDB? There's some community members saying that the XDB has been dying or going away for a long time. There's some reasons for that. There's other evidence, or at least before the BoxEver XDB, that the XDB had a bright future. So the BoxEver acquisition, though, has made things interesting. I think I think there could be place for both of them. So my answer was a yes to that, or no, rather. It will not replace. It could be that the XDB, the best comparison I can think of right now, in my mind, the XDB could be potentially the media library and the BoxEver, the content hub. If that makes sense. What does everyone else think?
Who's going to be the workbox?
The workbox, it's what has that thing changed in at least 12 years at all? 15?
Hey, the new version of it just was announced the winner of Hackathon. Somebody came up with a really good, incredible version of, very interactive way of managing workbox. It almost looked like, a Jira board. I wonder how that would scale when you have maybe, 300 items or something, but hey, something new.
It looked pretty slick. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So what do you guys think? Varun, what do you think?
What about the back to BoxEver? I was leaning towards a no. To me, if XP is around, unless they come out with a whole new architecture and explaining to their existing customers why they've invested so much in XP, whose primary purpose is the XDB that differentiates it from XM. Basically, you're gonna make a lot of people very unhappy. So architecturally or business strategy wise or product strategy wise, that basically is the end of XP. If you get rid of XDB, it's then just XM. And who knows, maybe that is their strategy. Maybe they will go that way and just call it XM and Content Hub, because that's all we've heard in the past 2 years. We haven't heard much about XP roadmap, or XC is, for all practical purposes, gone, not alive anymore. But XP may be going the same route. Maybe it becomes a legacy platform that is supported until some news that says, you know, XM plus Content Hub plus Box Ever is the new XP, or basically the new future, right? And it's all stacks. It's the suite is gone, basically, right? Because yeah, that's where I was thinking. I mean, it would be a very difficult conversation, and I don't know how many people are going to come and ask for their money back. So I don't think that's going to work with you appease all the XP customers. So, but I want to hear yes, right? Who thinks it's a yes? Maybe somebody wants to chime in. I think two of us we already know.
Let's hear from someone who answered yes.
We'll replace it.
I said no. I said no for much of the same reasons Varun did. Was like we've sold clients just on XDB and personalization all on their own, and to have to unsell that now and try to explain, well, you know, now you have, or even worse, force them into an upgrade to the same platform later on. It's like that's going to be a super hard sell.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Nobody, does anyone want to jump in and defend the yes? Going once, twice. There's no right answer. We're speculating, so we could totally be wrong right now. I bet the Sitecore product people will be watching this video and laughing.
Does
All
make
right, well,
sense with the SaaS models and everything that they go on with. SaaS, right? It's going to only be XM stuff, so it would make sense that they bring all the SaaS stuff on board and make that the new package instead of trying to make XP the, you know, some kind of SaaS model.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation. Well, a good amount of conversations that we get into where customers are waiting for the SaaS promise. How long will it, you know, take to get there, though? That's a question. What that SaaS story is going to look like, right? Are we going to have the XDB, or is it going to be the XP that we know as we know it, or is it going to be a Content Hub with personalization plugged in? There's some interesting, you know, scenarios or directions in which the platform could go to. It could potentially, you know, Content Hub could grow into the content layer and the stack. You know, then you have personalization potentially. Right now we have Sitecore AI, right? So that's going to mature. That could provide personalization. Box Ever comes with its own personalization engine, so it'll be interesting to see how that's going to play with what Sitecore has to offer, right?
Yeah, I think it's more than even personalization, right? So XDB does one out of the three things, let's say, or maybe two out of the three things Content Hub does, but to what promise, right? So two things, yeah, data collection and aggregation, and then visitor identification. Those are the two main things where you could say, yeah, CDP does it, but CDP does it way beyond, you know, what is powered by Sitecore. Yeah, you have Universal Tracker and you have XConnect, but we all know the performance challenges with you know, extending and opening up basically Sitecore to swallow data from a lot of channels. But the most key and the most important thing is the decision engine, right? Marketers are basically sitting around, you know, waiting for somebody to tell them what to do, right? It's not so much about, you know, what is the solution, what feature, how are you gonna, you know, configure, you know, a marketing automation campaign. It's tell me who to market to, right? And how do I market? At what point in time? Daytime, nighttime, afternoon time, which region, what type, what part of the world, in what language, in what format? That is where the gold is. And XDB is just not, it's not built for that. It's not going to, you know, get to that point. And that's where, you know, we keep discussing that CDPs seem to be the next gold rush in MarTech space, but it still has to kind of prove itself. There's so many of them out there. And from our understanding, you know, talking to our research partners and others, they're built to do one thing and one thing well, right? That's what they will do. That's where all CDP started, for one industry vertical, for one particular type of use case. And then they expand and say, yeah, we do it all. But the truth is they still do that one thing really well. So if you're built for retail, then it's a retail CDP. It really, you could say it would work for a lot of others, but it generally typically doesn't fit the bill when it comes to other industry verticals. But yeah, I mean, there are hundreds, more than 100 out there. It would be good to see how BoxEver will give us tools to differentiate themselves from, what's in the battle cards, who are you going up against, and where do we win, right? Because basically now we're all becoming advisory partners with move towards SaaS more than implementation partners in that sense. So we'll be recommending in architectures and solution designs and technology selection why Content Hub versus something else, or BoxEver or 451 or something else over a competitive piece of technology, because fundamentally we're moving towards the stacks approach and assembling the right stack. So who do we recommend? When do we recommend it? I think that'll be the critical thing. But yeah, I mean, Alex, maybe I would love to hear your thoughts. You're obviously ex-Sitecore. You may have a little bit more sort of insight. I know it's been a while, but still.
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I haven't spent any time looking into any of those products. I'm sort of waiting for the completion of this acquisition spree, right? So to understand the big picture. I think the biggest news is, it feels like it's yet to come. So sort of it feels like there was something else happening, right? But it's kind of weird that we have to speculate on all of this instead of Sitecore giving a more clear picture where they're going. It's kind of strange, and the future of the products, what kind of got Sitecore there, where they are, that's unclear, and that is really strange, right? It's all, yeah, XP, it's all sounds good, fantastic, and the vision, but many brands still use the system because of the robust, proven content management capabilities and what you can do. So it's sort of like going back to the basics and not seeing anything happening really in that area for years. That seems a little bit strange. So I don't know. I mean, the crystal ball is broken in terms of anything. So including the cycle world, including real estate world, including going back
Stock
to
market,
normal world.
financial.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just that time, I guess.
Parallel
Yeah,
universe.
we'll see. I think next few months will show. It's clear that there was a line being drawn in the sand, right? What is past and what is future, and products built by different companies, different teams, right? They will need to integrate somehow with the past, and that will be a big challenge. There are companies that do it really well, acquisition and integration. Other companies struggle, so we'll see how it is gonna play out.
Yeah, we'll extend this. This is a good discussion. I know we're scheduled to spend 20 minutes on it, but I think these are good things that will be important for others to watch later too. That's a good point. That's how Google, the backward compatibility, to your point, that's how Google keeps screwing up the enterprise customers by deprecating technology every 2 years. They can't hold on to them. Good, huh?
Or even Salesforce by not successfully integrating products, right? They keep acquiring and relabeling products as Salesforce and, Marketing Cloud or whatever, but it's never really working well with the ecosystem. It's never really come together as a finished product.
Mm-hmm. We were recently looking into a consistent way to integrate with Salesforce products. Guess what the solution was? A browser extension. That's the only way to consistently integrate with Salesforce UI. Man, so, okay, good discussion. So let's move on to the next one. Order cloud by 451. will that replace Sitecore Experience Commerce? The majority said yes. I tend to agree, but I want to hear from someone else on this call. We have Roland coming to us from Alpha Solutions. Roland, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's obvious. Honestly, it's never really been a good product, right? I mean, the architecture is, I don't know what to say. It just sounds wrong. Yeah, so it's fine, but it was never really architected for SaaS anyway, right? So I spend most of my time on it, so I like part of the features, but yeah, I get it. It makes sense. Sitecore spent so many years on commerce, and when they finally did something, it's what it is. I don't know if you guys see it differently. I know, Vasily, you worked on it as well, so you know, right? The learning skills, the productivity of developing on it is extremely hard. I mean, it makes so much sense to do something else for sure. I mean, it makes sense. That's my take on it. That's an easy one. That's an easy one. It's harder for the clients that you spend, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, or I almost say thousands of dollars on developing on it, and now what? Right? That's the hardest part. But that's like with any technology, right? Once in a while you run for it for some years and you just stay on it, and 3 years after you move to something else. I mean, fine. That's my take. There's no upgrade path in any way on it anyway, right? So.
Yep. What's also interesting is the word was out that Experience Commerce was being rebuilt using cloud technologies, using Content Hub tech stack before the box ever was announced.
Yeah.
So there was, there's definitely hope for Sitecore Experience Commerce, but with box ever or Order Cloud coming into play, things are definitely changing. What's interesting is with Order Cloud, Roland, have you looked into that at all?
Yeah, just a little, poked around with the demos and all that, but I think it was a little funny on the day on the partner update that they said that they would still support it, and for the future I don't see why, but yeah, again, just my take on it.
You mean the Experience Commerce will be still supported?
Yeah, to keep going on for I don't know how many years on it. I guess they have to, because they sold it like that, but I mean, it makes so much sense for clients to move on, right, for something else.
Yep. It makes a lot of sense. Let's hear from someone who answered no. Who'd like to jump in and voice?
We just had the partner enablement thing right before this call for 451. I don't know if anybody joined that one. It seems like they're marketing it more as a B2B versus Experience Commerce is meant to still satisfy the B2C market. They had this little graphic or a screenshot of it. I can send it, but it seems like to get the whole commerce picture, they're intending to use XC plus 451 in some fashion to get the B2C and B2B market created.
It's hard to understand you. It sounds like your mic on vacation out with you right there.
And for some reason, my headset's not working. Can you hear me now? Better?
It's slightly better. Yeah.
I was saying that it seems like they're marketing the 451 stuff more as a B2B kind of product, whereas XC Commerce will still be handling the B2C stuff. And to get a full picture, the two of them are going to work together somehow. Someone specifically asked at the partner forum if XC is going away because of this, and they were very adamant that it's not. So I was just trying to play safe there.
I mean, to be honest, it would be suicidal for Sitecore to say that XC is going to go away. It's imagine being a customer on XC and hearing that.
Predicament as XP. I don't think you can ever say on a public forum where a product is retiring. But if you read between the lines, the founder or the CEO think the CEO is now responsible for commerce product development, right?
Is the global global commerce guy now.
Yeah, so to me, that's almost a no-brainer that it's really sunsetting anything else other than 451, their order cloud. I'm actually really excited about something they mentioned today, that beyond the B2B and B2C and other variants, and they combine, B2C is, assumed to be part of B2B. What I really liked was they mentioned that it actually can help you build marketplaces. I think that will private marketplaces and having a very different sort of commerce model. Because I've personally worked on one project. We're starting another one hopefully here soon. And in B2B enterprise marketplaces, they're very promising. And that's like the next sort of, long running commerce engagement compared to even B2B. In the classic sense, because with SaaS and having, a lot of automation for, or let's not say automation, maybe self-service for the commerce and the buying journey in B2B, getting that right alone is a big hassle. But imagine if you can do it with a standard framework where sellers come and have to play by the rules of something that is already predefined. That could be a much faster way to get around the classic issues of B2B commerce. Like nobody has B2B commerce working the way they want it to work. And hardly anybody is really able to do a full end-to-end purchase cycle without a manual touch point, right? Even today. And it's always an issue with integrations. There's always, point-to-point architectures and, lack of APIs. But imagine a SaaS platform that comes in and just says, hey, I will do B2B, not just for you, but for a whole ecosystem of your partners and bring them all together. So I would really love to kind of check out that part of what they have to offer.
Yeah, I think the commerce story is only going to grow. Roland, you're probably also pretty excited about that. The new CEO, Steve, he came from SAP. He's coming from the commerce background. And he's been talking about commerce, content to commerce story quite a bit. A lot of his appearances were mentioning commerce specifically. So I think there's going to be definitely a lot of focus on the commerce side of things. But I do agree. I think 451 with the order cloud, by the way, which is slightly confusing. 451 is the company, order cloud is the product. So this will probably end up being Sitecore Commerce Cloud. Any bets on the name? Sitecore Commerce Cloud?
Very creative. Everybody has a commerce cloud. Salesforce, SAP, everybody's got a commerce cloud now.
Can't be Experience Commerce. That's taken.
Commerce rocks.
There you go. All right, final one question. Where do you see Sitecore development moving to? So the majority answered Jamstack, and trailing right behind it is all the above.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Don't get me started on XSA. I really hate XSA. So anything else? Thanks.
Alex, what do you think? I know you're slightly biased, just a little bit.
Just a little.
It's not me. It's the open source development community. I mean, if the question is about the front end, I mean, the answer is clear: is whatever use JavaScript in one flavor or the other. It doesn't have to be Jamstack, but I think a combination of Jamstack and hybrid server-side rendering pages where JavaScript runs the show on the front end, and then you keep using .NET for all the middleware, APIs, backend stuff. So there will be a mix. But if the question is about what do you build presentation layer in, then the answer is unapologetically JavaScript in one flavor or the other. If this is just general Sitecore development, there will be a mix of multiple technologies.
Okay. multiple technologies? What makes you think? Makes you say that?
It's clear that the head is separated, right? So what's left is the backend APIs extension point for whatever server side there will be, whether it's GraphQL extenders that will likely be either server-side JavaScript or .NET. There will be a mix of those, right, for a while. But the front end, the decoupled head, I don't see anything else really be in the 90% bucket other than JavaScript-based technology, whether it's server-side Node, it's pre-built static stuff together with some mix of dynamic, but it's all JavaScript. There will be folks who'll be using .NET Core and Blazor. There will be individuals that shall not be named like that, but and the beauty is that this is what will keep it interesting. But if we're looking into mainstream, I mean, the way React took over even enterprise, it's like there is nothing that is even close.
I tend to agree. That makes sense. Does anyone have any speculations on what the future of SXA will look like? Because this is the only one that's not headless out of the whole list. And it's interesting that no one voted for JSS. Nobody voted for JSS.
Well, Jamstack sort of includes JSS because JSS is one of the pieces to do Jamstack, right?
Yeah.
So I will factor that in.
Yeah, and especially with them announcing support for Next.js, I think they're sort of endorsing Next.js as the generator, static site generator, at least to get them started. So that's an interesting announcement. If it's not official, it should be or will be. Nick, I think, will be announcing that, or he already.
But it isn't.
That really brings JSS back.
But I think it is also like different use cases, right? I mean, are you going to build a fast website, a commerce site, or are you going to do a bunch of brand pages with focus on the content editor's experience, which is obviously XSA, but never underway and never going to be able to do any fast performance on page renderings and everything. I mean, it's just different use cases as I see it, right?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, and I think my talk kind of touches upon what Sitecore has given us as sort of the guiding principle of where they see, GSS still being used versus, totally decoupled or fully static site. But basically, in the pre-rendering thing, you're picking between SSG and server-side rendering, and there are clear cases for that, right? And a lot of our customers still using very static sites. They're deploying Sitecore for just very static content, very few use cases of portals and applications or SPAs powered by Sitecore. But if we start to see a lot more of those, then of course you're going to see a lot more of GSS as well. But JSS basically becomes a conduit for allowing you to use Experience Editor, basically manage presentation more than anything. So anything outside of that, it's just fully headless.
The biggest problem with SXA is the front end performance hit. Like it's impossible to get to green lighthouse with SXA, like without chopping off pretty much everything. So it was built not in line with modern front end performance expectations. That's sort of reality, and the struggle to get to, especially after the page rank changes, that all the vitals will be so important for business. So I think there will be a major move from SXA to something more lightweight, modern, really built with performance as feature in mind.
That is spot on. I don't get me started on that. That's so frustrating. But using XSA, we have a commerce clients and the whole struggle is so much customization of pulling XSA out of XSA to make the page rendering work, because and it's like if you get, it's just ridiculous. Like pull tons of JavaScript and CSS files that you're never going to use on all the pages. It's so basic. I don't know what went wrong there, right? It's like, it's just so wrong.
Yeah, I think goalpost has shifted towards really performance first architectures on the front end, and anything that was built or conceived a decade ago is just not in line with any modern thinking, and it's just not even a fair comparison. Like using new frameworks like Svelte that sort of compiles into essential just the JavaScript you need to run, right? No other bloat. Build time purging of CSS. You says essentially you can run on 8 kilobyte of CSS and maybe even under 200 kilobyte of JavaScript. Pretty large web application. They say that's amazing, right? So you're not compromising anything, but you get access to all the riches from the modern ecosystem. And it's just no other CMS company can keep up with innovation on the presentation tier, right? And that's sort of what Sitecore finds itself with SXA, and it'll be interesting to see what's next.
Yeah, would you care to share the numbers you just mentioned, CSS and JavaScript size? Do you care to mention in the context of what entity that is, like a commerce shop or a B2B client, or who's running that, and where can we see sort of that example of, this is really the future?
We have some customers that are kind of running very lean front end. It's JSS based. Is sort of running at the limit of what you can do with React. But what I'm referring to is all the just last year's innovation that are, it will give you even more lean front end that you'll be able to execute on. So I haven't seen many customers on it. There's headless implementations that sort of makes it easier to pull this off because CMS is not in your way in terms of what you want to do on the front end side of things. So we did it for our own website. That was an exercise to get to high 90s, and that was a challenge. The moment you add Google Analytics script, you back to high 70s, right?
And what about controlling
for documentation?
And controlling the client of putting like 500 DTM tags into it, that spoils everything. Yeah. That's my biggest worry. Like every time, like you're screwing it up yourself, man. It's it's insane.
Well, you have to go pull and build with, and you see all the garbage that they're loading. And the one project we did, we found it was optimized. They had like 4 different universal trackers on the same site, and they were all sucking up the numbers from a client-side perspective, client-side performance.
So it's clear we're moving to the headless, in the headless direction. SXA needs to get on the treadmill, and Jamstack is leading the way. So on that bombshell, we'll move on to our sessions. The first one, again, Varun Nehra will be presenting on Experience Edge and Jamstack. Varun is a multi-year Sitecore MVP, Sitecore veteran. It's just overall a great guy. So Varun, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's my first time being on the West Coast and seeing and interacting with all the friends over on the other side of the States. So how much time do I have, Vasily? I just want to make sure I stick to my time limit if there is one. I'm planning 30 minutes.
30 minutes, yep.
Okay, I hope I can get through that. And before I kind of jump into it, I just want to give a disclaimer. This is just my learnings from what I have read and uncovered and experienced so far with all the information coming our way from Sitecore through learning portals, through what's out there in the public space. So feel free to correct me if my assumptions are wrong, my understanding is wrong. But Jamstack is just very new for me. Experience Edge just was announced a few days ago. I'm still trying to learn from all the masters that have put a lot of content out there and kind of digest it and put it, get to the meat of what they're they're really proposing. So the topic I chose for today was getting you ready for Jamstack with Sitecore Experience Edge. So quick intro. I think Vasily already introduced me. I'm the VP of Solution Architecture at Altudo. I head up our digital solutions group. Vasily and I work very closely. I'm a Sitecore Technology MVP, almost 2 decades being in the industry, worked on several end-to-end Sitecore deliveries and engaged with 50 plus clients. I can't even keep account of different ways in which I've come across and engaged with a lot of clients over the years. I am based in Atlanta, and you can reach me on Twitter. You can follow me at Sitecore Varun, and you can read my blog post at sitecorevarun.com. So I wanted to take a few minutes to kind of just relay my understanding of Jamstack and see, what's the fastest way somebody who's never heard of Jamstack can absorb what it means, because there's so many different things that come at you, and some sound like myths versus reality versus you see a flying unicorn at times and say, oh, that's Jamstack. Not really. So I wanted to just start with the highest level, and I know there's a lot more smarter people on the call than I am, but I hope at least a few of you will get some value out of this. So very quickly, Jamstack is JAM. J stands for JavaScript, A for APIs, and M for markup. But it is important to understand, what does it actually mean? Like, we all know, we all work with APIs and JavaScript and markup. It's nothing new, right? And we work with a lot more than that, including server-side technologies. But when it comes to JavaScript, right, that is sort of the foundation of what Jamstack is all about. And the idea there is you focus on building experiences and leave the API and core capability development and ownership to domain experts. So for example, as a JavaScript developer, you don't have to solve for identity management, right? It's an API, right? Somebody's figured it out. Somebody's done it really well. All you're doing is consuming. So your focus is really rich experiences. When it comes to APIs, that's the point, is that you have separation of concerns. Domain experts can now offer their products and services via APIs, and basically lowering the burden for application developers like ourselves to start from scratch on a lot of these things. And of course, the premise behind markup is not so much who writes HTML, CSS. It's more around basically pre-rendering, right? Basically building the entire front end with sort of static and highly optimized static pages and assets that can be put together during the build process. So you reduce the number of requests to dynamically update the front end, but although that still exists, but the idea is basically you pre-render the results, and your CDN is a very important component of where you're going to host the static page views. And the promise is reduce costs, reduce complexity, reduce risk, all of that good stuff. So just pulling this from, I thought this is a good sort of elegant way of just at a high level, or the Jamstack community explaining what are you moving away from, and what do you care about, right? So all of those layers of web app servers, database servers, CMSs, all of that goes away, and all you're left with is what is on CDN and what are the endpoints that are available for that client. And client here is a browser, an IoT device, social media. It could be AR, VR. It could be anything, right? Anything that can work with basically modern web, right? HTML and JavaScript. So what is JavaScript and what it isn't? Nick and others kind of put it really well as well. Let's not assume it's a technology stack. It has nothing to do with offering you a stack. Although you see all those logos, it's not to say you have to pick from that stack and you're putting together a tech stack. It is not a platform. It is not a framework. So what it really is an architecture approach that is centered around two core constructs, pre-rendering and decoupling. So pre-rendering is basically everything there is to know about when we're talking about Jamstack, and it's basically to generate markup that presents the view at build time rather than on demand, pinging web servers. And decoupling in this case is basically creating a clean separation between systems and services. So the idea is to, again, we're trying to operate the site, and each component of it can be independently sort of swapped out, and it's sort of plug and play architecture, right? So you're not tied to any particular systems or endpoints. So that really is brought forth. And its purpose is basically to make web faster, more secure, and easier to scale. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. So speaking of pre-rendering, falls into two buckets. Pre-rendering, of course, we've been talking about it all along, static site generation and server-side rendering. When do you use which one, and where do you get the benefit of which type of implementation? And the term static here, doesn't refer to a static site, right? In the sense that you cannot have dynamic pages, right? You can still build pages that can serve content dynamically. But the key difference between the two is with SSG, you're generating HTML at build time, making it static, and allowing client-side scripting to basically make it dynamic. And then server-side rendering obviously is on every request you're generating a new experience by pinging a server. So it's a little bit more classic in terms of closer to how we build client-server applications and things like that. So the benefit of SSR really is that you can change HTML without requiring a build. And that's really the only big difference, I would say, which means that you can continuously update the UI by making content changes, right? And then SSG is really where you'll see the performance we've been talking about, and it's really ideal for brochureware sites, blogs, developer documentation, and things like that. But server-side rendering is really more for portals, as I was talking about earlier too, and more sort of dynamic applications that we want to build. So why, right? Why do we care? Why is this important? Yeah, Jamstack will give you a lot of things that they say, yes, it's all of these things, right? We go to their website, they'll give you a nice description of why each of these and even beyond these, but really it comes down to one or two things, right? It's really performance and scale. That's my number one, number two. The rest of it, go figure it out, right? We can figure out security, you can figure out maintainability, and it's all relative to who you are and what you do, portability. But really, performance is the real promise that page load speeds and the ability to impact the engagement and conversion through performance really comes through. And then when it comes to scale, you're not working with traditional architectures anymore. You're not building these, caching strategies and trying to build, complex system architectures that may or may not scale depending on how you're deploying it. So with scalability and flexibility, you really get, and portability, you get to deploy things where you want them, regionally speaking, in the cloud, on the edge, and things like that. So, so then how do you actually build, how do you go about just, building something with Jamstack? So I put it into like 4 or 5 bullet points, and Tony kind of helped me validate my understanding a little bit as well, as I was trying to figure out, is this it? Am I missing anything? So he was helpful in kind of validating this for me as well. But basically, I want to call out a distinction between what I consider as picking a JavaScript framework versus picking an SSG, because basically what you pick, it's more of a philosophy, right? So if as a company if our philosophy is, oh, we're going to be a React-based company and we've picked that, or we're a Google-based company and we do all things Angular, that already gives you a direction in terms of what you will do next when your first pick is the static site generator that you're going to pick. So I think it's important to note what you will pick as your JavaScript CSS framework. And I've put React and Bootstrap up there because of Sitecore, right? We're here talking about on a Sitecore user group. Bootstrap is an SXA. I know we don't love SXA. I'm not even gonna go there, Roland. But they did build support for Bootstrap. There is that move towards React and Next.js. So that's what I'm saying, that you have to pick a JavaScript framework, pick an SSG, pick your CMS, obviously Sitecore. But then if you want to do personalization on top of that, there's a little plugin there for Uniform. Two other important things to note is what you will do for fast automated build and deployment. And this is where Netlify was on top of mind. And, there are a few others you could use, Vercel works well. And there are a few others, and I'm sure a few other options, like when it comes to CDN2, you want to do, Cloudflare or something else. It's totally up to you. But the fastest way, the lowest cost, just pick up all of this stuff. It's mostly free, except for Sitecore to get you going. And then you're basically good to go. If you know how to work with these, I think you can call yourself, a Jamstack solution. So with that, I'm going to move into Sitecore Experience Edge. So this was a big announcement that Sitecore made, and still trying to figure out, like, what is this Experience Edge, and is it a product? What does it cost? Who buys it? Where do you put it? All that good stuff. So basically, Sitecore came out and introduced two versions of this product. They said, we're going to do something called Experience Edge for Content Hub, and we're going to do something called Experience Edge for experience management. And note that something that stood out for me was that there's no mention of XP, obviously, right? But I'll kind of touch upon that towards the very end, the last slide, when we talk about how do you pick which one is right for you. But again, they tout a lot of benefits of this approach: faster time to market, infrastructure support, modernizing the whole thing, flexibility to meet, scalability, performance, all of the same stuff that now kind of starts to show flavors of what we saw with Jamstack. So the things that Jamstack promises is kind of what Experience Edge is also promising, as in lesser infrastructure, lesser maintenance, faster development, great performance, incredible scalability, and flexibility and portability, choice, and all that good stuff. So what is Experience Edge? It's just a box that sits between your client and your content management system. So what do you put in that box is really what they're talking about. So you have all your channels, you have content management. This is something that sits in the middle. If you look at it a little bit more closely, that's where they're talking about your content endpoint, right? So the products we have, that's the content management. It's interesting to know that they're calling Content Hub content management, right? So it's a given that you can manage all your content and treat it as a CMS. And experience management, obviously, is a CMS. And then you have the two flavors. Expanding that a little bit more, they're able to call out saying, the process is, if you're starting with Content Hub or experience management, basically it's a GraphQL endpoint, really, right? Experience Edge is nothing but a GraphQL endpoint. And that will deliver content from your preferred choice of CMS to all the channels. So in one word, it's a GraphQL endpoint, right? When you look at it scaling more regionally, you're talking about things like, having multiple delivery centers across multiple regions, but then publishing on the edge, which is, self-replicated, it's scaled, it's in the cloud. You don't have to worry about how it scales and reaches your audience. So that being said, this is intended to be a fully SaaS product. So you don't buy, any infrastructure, or you don't host anything, you don't maintain anything. And then basically the GraphQL endpoint will scale regionally, in the cloud. And basically the idea is to bring the structured data closer to the edge and basically make it available globally. But the way they call this, although they use the term CDN, it is not the CDN that we have been talking about in terms of static site, generation or hosting static page views on CDN. This is an entirely different CDN. So it's not that, hey, I'm building, I'm using a static site generator. Can I just push my content to Experience Edge? No, right? That's really what they're saying. This is a separate product. You will have your own CDN to do what you want to do with the presentation layer. At least that's my understanding of what they're talking about in their documentation. So when we look at this and go back to, and this is where it kind of starts to tie into the whole Jamstack concept, right? So if you remember SSG and the dynamic pages, that server-side rendering aspect of it as well. How do you make it dynamic? Basically, the CDN sits in the middle, and there's a bunch of edge workers, and you have content management with blob storage, and content management that then publishes the content delivery with blob storage, and you can do that with XM or with Content Hub. But the key here is also that there are events that trigger changes that are made either in Content Hub. Let's just say Content Hub because we're still not clear on the XM piece of it. But the key here is that the triggers that the events and triggers that they have built into how edge workers keep your content alive and up to date and keep your CDN up to date. That's really what gives it its sort of benefit. So both in terms of static site and dynamic site, you can cache queries and work with your choice of delivery platform, and there's a lot of benefits. But kind of taking this model and then talking a little bit about, well, I now understand at least the building blocks of what Experience Edge is, but let's pick one product at a time and say, what do I do as a Sitecore consultant or developer or Sitecore, a solution provider? What do I do with it, let's say with Content Hub? So with Content Hub, I could sum up their entire documentation in like one slide, and it's basically 4 steps. This is all we will do as on the Content Hub side of things. The number one thing is you're going to configure the delivery platform. And this is where you're talking about, schema level changes, field level publishing settings, and things like that. Then you will set up evaluation filters in Content Hub, which basically govern what gets published and when it gets published, right? So they give you very granular control over the entire schema that you have in Content Hub and what do you want to publish and when. Then basically it's you working against the preview API, the GraphQL endpoint. That's what you're developing against. And at that point, you have access to the full unpublished schema. So you can be working in parallel as somebody's actually putting together the schema. And when it's finalized, you'll then work with the delivery API, where whatever you have built as the experience basically deprecates to use the schema that is actually published with the content that is actually published. And to ensure there's security, basically you're going to use something in Content Hub to manage access to the APIs. So basically you'll generate API keys and manage them in Content Hub, release those to your developers, and they're building against secure APIs. So all in all, what you need is basically understanding of GraphQL and just a secure connection and JWT token for authorization, and everything else is just, Jamstack, right? JavaScript, HTML markup, and then consuming the GraphQL API. So what's the job in this for me personally as a developer? Will be basically to build, custom data definitions, schemas, relationships, metadata properties. All of these will need to be configured in Content Hub. This is basically, I would call this a Content Hub project more than an Experience Edge project, right? It is really what you do classically speaking in Content Hub implementations. And that's what you will continue to do. You'll probably verify it through the GraphQL APIs to ensure you're building the right schema. But once you've configured this in Content Hub, that's it. There's nothing else you're doing. So when it comes to Sitecore Experience Edge for XM, there's a bit more to unpack here. So remember the box that was thrown in there, and they talk about that Experience Edge now becoming content delivery and load balancers and all that good stuff. But just kind of getting to the point, it's basically the three options which were in the survey, right? You're either going to build something with Next.js, which they're officially announcing, right? Hey, Next.js will support, and you can work with JSS for server-side rendering. And then, of course, you have the option of ASP.NET Core apps. So there's three immediate ways in which you can start headless development and consume Experience Edge on top of it. And when you're using Next.js, you have the CDN. Otherwise, the rest are self-explanatory. So I think this is the key, right? As a developer, which one would I pick? And we went sort of back and forth to say, well, GSS, yes, maybe. But really, Next.js, CDN, that seems to be more sort of the future in terms of working with XM. And XM is nothing but, a small change to Sitecore configuration to turn off XDB. You're an XM, right? It's not that, it's basically every XP customer is an XM customer, basically. So there's nothing stopping you from delivering this by just using your current license of Sitecore. Focus on the far left box. You probably are the fastest to build it that way. Everything else may not prove to be as performant or fulfill the promise of Jamstack. At least that's my take on it. So I would focus on that first option there. But when we talk about the flow, right, how does all of this come to be in terms of content and where it's stored and how does it make it to the client? The way they're showing it is that, of course, you have Sitecore CM and you have the database that, is a content repository. When you publish content, that's what kicks in the delivery worker, kind of similar to Content Hub where you have the edge workers for Content Hub and they have their own triggers over there. Here it's based on publishing. And from once you publish it, the delivery worker pushes two different things to two different storage locations. So items and layouts go to one bucket, and then media assets go to another bucket. And rightfully so. You'll see as it fills out the purpose of that. From there, it makes it to, let's say, the delivery server. And from there, we're talking about the GraphQL endpoint that is available to you that pings both the delivery server and the media storage to keep CDN up to speed on what really is the most current page view. And basically what they're also adding is that GSS application, if you're calling it a GSS application, you're building a GSS application, you're basically talking to the CDN. Everything below that is not a concern. So I thought this was at least giving me, a good understanding, some of the basic building blocks of what to expect with XM. It'll be good to see some of this in action, but it feels like Content Hub is much closer than XM in terms of Experience Edge becoming available anytime soon. So then this was an interesting flow. So this was what I was referring to earlier when I said, let's see where we go with this and how the whole kind of journey kind of come together and is centered around the XM as the content repository. So the idea is if you start with XM and you have your pre-rendered layouts and items, they get pushed to the XM content delivery on Edge, which again, they're saying is a fully SaaS solution. So you're not buying and hosting any additional hardware. You still stop where your XM stops. Important thing to note there is that XM delivery connector. So at the most, you're configuring XM to ensure that that connector can push to XM client content delivery on the edge. From there, we're talking about those variants again, the 3 variants we just looked at: static side, server side rendering versus .NET headless. And then those render the pages that are eventually fed to the client-side app. And once the client app gets its interactions from the customer, it knows when and how to ping and make AJAX requests to make that static version dynamic. And that still goes back to content delivery. An important thing to note there is, again, it doesn't go back to XM or any other part of your Sitecore infrastructure. So again, you're fully decoupled from what you're hosting and paying for internally. But this is the key, right? This thing at the bottom I thought was interesting. This is where they're really hoping that GSS will still hang around and will be very relevant as a XM customer. And with 10.1, I think they're making it available as part of subscription licensing that you may not have to pay for it additionally. Don't hold me to that. At least that's what I've heard. But the idea is, again, the preview and layout items can then be enabled with server-side rendering and basically enable the experience editor on Horizon. So if you're not doing anything else, you're still building for experience editor and Horizon support. That'll be the big selling point as to why GSS, in addition to anything else that you're doing. So in this case, when you look at the option, I would pick the one in the middle here and pick this one here. So you only have to implement it once and it's fully supported in your client application and in Experience Editor. So you won't have to develop it 2 different ways or multiple ways. But all in all, you do have options. And for all you know, some of your clients may not care to use Experience Editor, especially when it comes to very lightweight websites and things like that. So finally, to wrap it up, how do I pick the one that's right for me, right? So Sitecore has put together a sort of a good decision-making algorithm, I would say. I think it's a good first stab at it. Some of the things I may not agree with or may need to, may require further explanation. But basically they're saying to start with, involve your solution engineer, right? So figure it out with your solution engineer. What is the main problem you're trying to solve? And they think that, the main problem is one of these 2, right? That we need to focus on content strategy, or we need to provide seamless digital experiences. And I can see why that is very important, because certain organizations, you're talking to marketers and it's all about customer journey and engagement. They're not really focused on content strategies and content management and content lifecycle management. And that's sort of a sub-function of the marketing team. But if you, split it at that level and just follow along the track of just focusing on content, content as a service, making, enterprise content hub, ubiquitous across the organization, have a central repository for all your content. Then the next question is, what is a higher priority? Is it flexibility to maintain experiences by enabling authors? Or is it more around just governance and planning and asset management? So now you can already see which one does what, right? XM or Content Hub. So it's almost a given at this point, right? And they're making that distinction that people who would want to manage experiences, maybe the governance is not as important, but I would think that, it's equally important, if not more. But if you pick one, you're going with XM. If you pick the other one, you will first buy Content Hub for the full lifecycle management, and then you will enable Experience Edge for Content Hub. But if you look at that other track and say, you know what, it's not so much about content or assets or the granular pieces that I have to manage, but the higher priority is I'm looking at the overarching, brand strategy and the brand experience. And at that point, personalization is a big factor, and I still want to fulfill the promise of personalization. or optimize my operations. One of those two really is a differentiator. That second one I would really pull out of here and say, that's really not what I'm thinking about if I'm really focused on digital experiences and making those great. I'm not really worried about ownership of IT and reliance on IT. But here's where you say, well, if I want personalization, I would want XP, and we know we have our friends from Uniform. They can just as easily fulfill that promise of personalization without some of this, XP or some of the other hassles of maintaining and managing a very expensive platform. But time will tell, right? We'll have to see how non-technical folks relate to this product. Do they even grasp it? Do they even care about it? Or we're going to be left explaining, let's say, Experience Edge to just our technical counterparts, right? So the basic difference is, do I need WYSIWYG editing of content and presentation? If so, then probably XM and XP. Otherwise, it's content hub. So I'm going to pause there. That's at 32 minutes. So if there are any questions, discussions, feel free to contradict my understanding of it, or help educate me and the audience here. We'd love to hear some comments.
This is great. This is a pretty good decision diagram. Do you know if you get a choice of a CDN?
That's a great point. It was actually my previous topic too, where we talked about CDN. So there is a choice of CDN in certain aspects of what you will do, right? But not necessarily the SaaS solution itself. Because that, for what Experience Edge is, I don't think you have the option to pick the CDN. But they have mentioned that somewhere that, yeah, you can couple it with other CDNs that you're using for the SSG side of things. But that's a good one. I would definitely should follow up with Sitecore on that.
Awesome. Great presentation. Does anyone have any other questions?
All right.
Not much. I think the thing that I'm not struggling with, I guess it's just because of my age. Don't laugh. No, it's a change of the way that people develop, and lots of guys are used to use the classic .NET thingy. And now we're moving to something else. So I think that's what I'm not struggling with. I think it's the way it had to go, and that's the way it should go. But I think that the interesting thing about all this is the way development is going to go on, like from now and probably some way back where I didn't recognize it, and moving forward. I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, there's no way around it. I think this is absolutely the way it should go. But how many of you guys have heard you guys on your development team saying, no, I'm a backend developer. Oh, great. Go look for a new job, or do something else, or create an API, because your future is going to create an API. That's it. I think that's the interesting part of it. It's not like we can all talk about this, but that's the interesting part to me, at least.
Very rightfully said. I think, Roland, I think you really pointed out something, because I remember the one of the founders, Dave, which was of from Boxever, he said the same thing. Or no, I think it was Owen or Nick. I forget. One of those three guys said basically you're going to move from building DLLs to writing APIs, right? And this is where we have to see where the community will really go, because in the .NET world, .NET developers are not JavaScript developers, and they probably never will be. If you've been a .NET developer for a very long time, I would be surprised to see somebody really pivoting and becoming the master of JavaScript technologies. It could happen.
That's the way that's the way works go, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's how it is.
Yeah, and I think our customers are going to drive a lot of this, because in my personal experience, I've seen a few customers who have come to us and said, we have this technology capability in-house, so we have to work with this. And that mostly caters to, Angular versus React, one of those choices, or just .NET, right? Or Microsoft versus non-Microsoft. So if they're giving us that guidance, I think they're the ones that will be driving which way this goes. And before we know it, maybe Blazor comes up and a lot of .NET developers are starting to develop a lot of Sitecore in .NET. I just don't know if that'll happen or how soon.
No, maybe the thing I love most about this is that maybe I'm just naive and blonde and all that and old and all that, but it might turn out that we're driving business instead of technology, which is really, really nice.
Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Yeah.
I think the huge plus on the other side, which will beat all other arguments, will be the lower cost of development. Sitecore is still expensive to develop. Capability and skills are hard to find, but JavaScript, HTML, CSS will slice the budgets considerably, significantly, and that alone may be a big driver for all things Jamstack in the future, at least with Sitecore.
Yep, headless definitely democratized the development space for Sitecore. So great presentation, Varun. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Please come again. It's, with the virtual user groups now, Roland was actually, we were chatting on Twitter. Now it's easy to join from anywhere in the world now. I'm attending Atlanta user group that Varun is running. So here we go. The more the merrier. So we'll move on to the second session. Alex Shyba will talk. Will take us to school on performance. You guys got your school uniforms on. I'm gonna spend really any time introducing Alex. If you don't know Alex, you're in a Sitecore space. You're probably in the wrong space, or you just started.
But the shape is more tight on the presentation sheet, I think. So yes.
Alex, can we call
Seifert's days? Alex from the days of even Seifert. I'm like, yeah, everybody was.
Yeah, that's in front of the old office in Mill Valley. That's 10 years ago, probably.
Can we call you the father of JSS?
No. I was the instigator. Call me the instigator.
I think you're being modest.
I was bored in Sausalito, got nothing else to do, so we started playing around with stuff. Well, Path Analyzer was really precursor for JSS because the team made a decision not to build it in Speak, and we proved it to Ryan Donovan back in the day that we can do it in half of the time. So he's like, go for it. So we built it in React. We made it look like Speak, but it has nothing to do with Speak. And by building it completely decoupled from the platform, I think in 3 months, that allowed us to kind of think what would Sitecore development would look like in this kind of decoupled world, where you just build with some abstractions, and then CMS is not inside of your presentation layer. So that sort of was the precursor of this of JSS ideas explorations, but it became clear with React making it to the mainstream that things are changing. So, and Jamstack sort of amplifying this now, and so it's an interesting time to be on the front end side of things. And to be honest, coming back from the server side, I never looked back. It's a lot of fun building with modern JavaScript, and a bit intense because there's so much going on, so much change, but it's fun.
Well, you definitely made some good and right bets. And one of your recent bets is Uniform. So on that, I'll hand it over to you.
Yep, thank you. today is actually 3 years on the dot since I left Sitecore, so it's kind of funny.
Oh, wow.
In this capacity, so I want to show you pretty much the similar picture to what Varun painted, but something that you can actually use now with the current investments that you made already, or customer of yours already made, but get all the benefits, even more benefits out of Jamstack platform. So sort of the overall message here is that you don't have to wait to see the future. So we gotta look into kind of how Jamstack could actually be compatible with existing Sitecore MVC solutions, and look into multiple implementation scenarios, and then we'll talk about what we're seeing. I'm not gonna, since Jamstack was introduced properly, this helps me fast forward a couple of slides. What is Jamstack, and sort of why it's important. I think the biggest question here is, can I use it now, right? Can I use it on my Sitecore 8, Sitecore 9 built with MVC, with SXA or not? And can I incrementally adopt all these new technologies? So at Uniform, we, by the way, we do other things other than Sitecore. So we have our own personalization engine that runs for headless CMSs, contentful content stack, and sanity. So Sitecore is a big part of what we do, but not everything. And the story for Sitecore is different because what we believe in is an incremental adoption of these new technologies, that we want to first reduce and then eliminate the notion of full re-platforming of your digital experience platform solution. So a big part of that is kind of connecting these two worlds of hipster Jamstack world and existing world of Sitecore. So usually on that journey, there's a couple of blockers. So the J in Jamstack naturally means JavaScript. So that usually means you need to rewrite the presentation layer in JavaScript, which may not be feasible depending on where you are. Maybe not something you want to do right now. Then you're likely dealing with quite large websites that have thousands of pages. So being able to do build times static export means that you need to do this incrementally in order to support solutions with thousands of pages, right? Another piece is that usually Jamstack is a very Git-centric model where you push your code, it marries to some markdown, content in markdown, or maybe from a headless CMS. So it pulls out everything, bakes HTML pages, and then off you go. In Sitecore, we have publishing engine, right? So business users expect that they publish, they see results. So for them, changing and checking the status of the build somewhere in the system, it may not be ideal, right? And another big point is a big reason why Sitecore is bought and provisioned is the promise of personalization and all that universal tracking that has to be compatible with the current server-side page baking model and the tracking and state being on the server. It's sort of incompatible with the whole edge-based Jamstack realm. So that's a no-go usually. And the last piece that we often get to talk with IT teams about is that they already have multi-year contracts with their existing cloud provider, whether they are on AWS, on Azure, somebody, it may be on Akamai. Many folks are on Akamai, and IT teams love Akamai. It really alleviates so many problems for them. So for them, bringing another piece of their ecosystem is not always an option. So that's what all of these 5 points, that's what we are addressing in our product for Sitecore. Right? So in general sense, we it may seem like we are kind of all about building static site generators and plugins, but that's a starting point for us. So for us, the mission is to accelerate delivery of personalized sites and remove performance cost and scale considerations and operational cost from the picture, so business can enable personalization. They can personalize anything, and it's not going to cost them arm and a leg. So that's what we are building and investing. Static site generators and ability to handle handshake with Sitecore. This is a necessary piece, but it's not everything, right? So what we primarily focusing is GSS is definitely like primary option, but adding support for MVC solutions as well. So being able to reuse existing presentation layer, being able to support incremental exports for larger sites that is built in agnostic fashion. So versus Next.js's incremental static site generation, which requires certain infrastructure capabilities. It's not a truly universal approach. So we invested in an approach that works everywhere with any front-end framework and any cloud. Also, the full integration with Sitecore publishing process, and this is kind of the meat of it all, is the ability to retain personalization and tracking, and make sure it's fully decoupled. So you can still configure rules and handle configuration of personalization in Sitecore, but you're not executing that in Sitecore. And deployment to platform of your choice, which is also, we gotta be super flexible with that. So how does this work in XM configuration? If we add personalization into the mix and you want edge-based personalization, Akamai runs the show here. So Akamai, we have a capability that allows dynamic request response rewriting and essentially giving you execution engine on the CDN level. You probably using Azure, so you will deploy a node service that runs the build, and then it will deploy to your Azure Blob Storage, which will be the source for the CDN to handle global distribution of all of your page data, HTML or JSON. And all the tracking is completely decoupled, so that runs in the browser, and that gives the context required for the personalization to take place. And dispatching of analytics can be done to GA, or if you have XDB in place and you just want to collect the data, you can still collect the data, but you can see XDB is not participating in the critical request handling process. So there is no session that runs, there is no server-side tracker. It's still there, but it's not part of the page rendering process. So it's a synchronous process that you can just collect all the page events from the browser. So you can still have that data if you want it. But many just use XM configuration for all that. Naturally, this is just one option. The beauty of Jamstack is super flexible. Varun touched on that. So there could be combination of these things. Azure Blob Storage plus Cloudflare CDN, Netlify, Vercel, AWS with S3 and CloudFront. Tencent, we have a customer that deployed to Tencent in China, running probably one of the first Jamstack deployments in that region, very cost effectively, and they can handle any scale. And the combinations are here. There's many more options possible. So that's kind of the intro. What I want to show you is the actual how does it work, right? And go through a couple of scenarios of taking an MVC site and getting that out, decoupled content, media, decoupled to CDN of your choice, and go through incremental front-end migration. So we're going to take one component and rebuild that in React and see how both can coexist. If, again, that's something you want to do, your teams may want to start moving component by component. So that's what we enable, and go through some typical scenarios. What happens with forms? What happens with search, auth? And I'll conclude showing you how edge personalization actually works. So let me share another part of my screen. I have a little bit of a mess here. There we go. All right, so you should be able to see a very fancy MVC site here. Right, it's coming through okay?
Yep.
All right, sweet. So this is one of our starters. I extended it a little bit with some additional functionality. There was a contact form where I can submit my request, a login box where I'm using Sitecore Services client to log in with an external user, really old school stuff. And I have a page where I actually display special deals that require the login. So it's not showing anything because I'm not logged in. So if I log in as, let's log in as Cam. Cam is a part of the silver group. So Cam can only see silver and bronze. Cam doesn't see the gold deal here. But if I log in as Jam, a Jam user can see the gold. So this is all using standard Sitecore security. The login is done through Sitecore Services client, nothing really too fancy going on. Besides that, I have search, so I can search for album, and here I'm running again Sitecore Services client. I decided not to go terribly fancy here. It runs a search query behind the scenes. I get my response, and I'm showing my type ahead. Really a poor man's type ahead here, and then I have ability to navigate to document. So really basic functionality. So it's running locally on my Sitecore. This is 10.1, I believe. We also support 8.2 and above. And actually it's the same module. So we have a multi-version target. So same binaries that work across all Sitecore versions from 8.2 to 10.1, which is an interesting challenge of its own. So MVC site, let's get it out to our CDN. We're going to use Azure Blob Storage, and we're going to use Netlify. So first, we're going to start with Azure Blob Storage. This site already has Uniform installed. It's a package, and it gives us some APIs. This is a map API. It gives us ability to extract all page level items. And one page that I have excluded is the deals page because it has login protected content, so I cannot handle it statically. And we'll talk about how to handle that. But you can control which pages can be included in scope for static export. And second service, I have a page service, which gives me all renderings from that page. It's a home page now with references to data sources. So pretty much all layout structure. But it also has MVC fragments being rendered. So essentially, each controller view rendering is being rendered by Sitecore, and its output is embedded in these HTML fragments. So this gives me ability to reuse existing MVC site as is and repackage it in a static context without changing any of my presentation code. So Sitecore is still doing the rendering, but it's going to be doing this rendering once at build time. And for that, I need to fire up static site generator. We use Next.js here because it's awesome. So this is one of our starter kits. It's bootstrapped with Uniform plugin that allows to interact with Uniform APIs. And it has some commands for us to get going. So there's no functional components here. That's important to mention because this is a scaffolding project. So it has one wildcard page implementation that wraps all of our pages in a Uniform context provider. And there is no real functional code. And there is a custom document. I'm importing existing Bootstrap here, so nothing else really. And then I have some Bootstrap styles here, static resources. So what happens when I'm running this app now it's going to do server-side rendering of my MVC site. But now Next.js and Node is going to do, and React is going to transform HTML into server-side React, and it's going to render it out. So essentially all of my, even the deals page will be rendered, because I'm asking this to be rendered here outside of the static context. But when I'm running npm run export, this is going to produce the static representation of my my site here. This will drop each page that I have in scope into a folder called out, which is here. So this is my album page, contact page, etc. And I can just fire up, actually do serve this folder out as a static server. So in this case, I have my all of my pages rendered on a static file server. Notice the images are messed up because images are not being exported, and we'll handle images next. So let me fire up this server again, and the server will now be not just a dev server, but is actually going to be server that will be doing on-demand static export when we publish. So it has an endpoint that we can post to, and I want to make sure my Azure Blob storage is empty. Yeah, so it is empty. This one is empty as well. No, it's not. So let me delete it. So we can actually cache output of Uniform APIs in Azure Blob as well. So this acts as your Experience Edge, so to speak. But it works on your account. So you just need to configure connection string and you're done. So let me bootstrap my application because I haven't built it yet. What I'm gonna do is first do initial export of my app. So I'm gonna do this initial content sync, and this is a completely optional capability. What it does is it extracts Uniform API statically into blob storage, and it also includes media. So I can figure out media export as well based on the folder. Pretty much include all of the images. This is one-time operation you need to do. And at this point, you completely decoupled from Sitecore from the static export perspective. So essentially, everything static export needs, it's already in the blob. So all of our page JSON data, our map, so I can actually do the export against blob storage instead of going against Sitecore if I wanted to. So this allows to decouple from Sitecore during large export jobs, and this will be updated incrementally as we move. So that's raw content. The web containers is also filled with media. So I configured media to sync under -media as well. So essentially all of my media assets are here already because I just synced, but I don't have my HTML pages here yet. So my site, if I open it up, it's still not loading in Azure Blob Storage. So let's fix that. I'm gonna go and simply just go and publish, and it doesn't matter what I publish. This is just acts as a trigger. So I'm just gonna republish the home page without any other pages. And because there is no pages that exist, this is gonna do full export, right? And what it does, it communicates with our node service here, and it's initializing export of all of the 5 pages in scope. And at the end of that static export is gonna deploy all those files to Azure Blob Storage. So if we go and refresh this right now, we should see all of our pages here, album, thanks, contact, etc., already present. And publishing is done. And here in publishing, I can actually see what happened and how many pages were synced. So if I go and refresh it, now this is my site, and you can see images are also loading now because they all serve from Azure Blob Storage as well. The deals page is not loading because it's excluded from scope. That's by design. So we'll because it's a login protected page, we'll deal with that a bit later. But the site and media is fully decoupled at this point. Now what happens if we do incremental stuff, right? So let's say we have a component like a carousel component, and we have a particular slide that users go and they change the title of the slide, right? We're gonna change that. What I don't want to do is, if I publish this item, I don't want to re-export the whole site. So we also have incremental static export enabled, and based on configuration, it will actually track down all page dependencies, because this is not a direct data source item. There is no other items that link to it, but it has a parent, or one of the ancestors, that is a data source item for my homepage. So though we publish the sub item itself, I'm just gonna go and smart publish because I just changed it. Uniform will detect that only the homepage will be exported. And you can see the message here, starting export for 1 pages. So that means only changes that will be detected, only pages with the changes that were just made during publishing will be re-exported. So that means if you have thousands of pages, you will only export pages that need to be re-exported. And this is a generic approach that works across any sort of cloud. So that's not the Next.js incremental stuff. That's the stuff that we built. And you can see that here it indicates that only 1 page was actually updated, and that's the home page. It also supports multi-site, so it will only resolve pages within a given site that you actually deploy into. So there's many options to make it efficient. So that's incremental. Now, in terms of incremental, let's do something here, and I'm gonna incrementally update one of the components here. So I just pulled one of the, just to save time on typing. Let's see if I have, see. I'm gonna bring back a React component. Actually, there we go. So this React component here, this is gonna be the first functional component that we actually gonna implement. So it matches the markup as is of the MVC rendering. The only thing I will do, I'm gonna add React in here, React.js, so we know this is actually React doing the rendering. So now we cherry pick component by name, and we're gonna add it to the index. In this case, we signal to Uniform SDK that component name content block or rendering called content block will be rendered by React. Do not pull the pre-rendered HTML from MVC rendering. And the moment I do that, I should be able to reload my site. And you can see now it's rendering exactly the same markup, exactly the same content from Sitecore, plus we added this React.js thingy here. So next time I'm doing deployment, I'm actually gonna have a hybrid of React and MVC renderings going here. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So another thing that we're gonna change. I'm gonna change this title here. So we see changes happening from both content management perspective and also code perspective. So what I expect here is another deployment to take place, which is gonna update our homepage, and our homepage will be running hybrid MVC and React together, and there we go. Now, I'm gonna pull up dev console here, and I'll show you that there is no additional JavaScript that is added to the page. So I'm still using old school jQuery, jQuery UI, and Bootstrap. I haven't actually added React to the page. I'm only using React for server-side rendering as a templating engine, and then everything else is still legacy JavaScript, let's call it that way. So you have that option. If this component was interactive, so let's say it's a slideshow, then I would need to include React on the page, making sure it rehydrates, take over, and I can do interactive stuff with it, but I don't have to. So I can focus on my kind of basic components. That's kind of one strategy if I want to do that. So it's adding React client-side is completely optional here. Now, let's deal with, so this is site decoupled. We incrementally updated it, incrementally rewritten this component in React. Now let's take a look what happens with search, right? Search is an Ajax-based thingy here, and it fails because, hey, it cannot reach a local, it's a blob storage, right? It cannot run the API. So I could just proxy it back to Sitecore server and retain API capability. And just to show you how this could be done, I'm gonna actually stop this. I'm gonna switch to Netlify because it's much easier for me to show all of the hybrid Jamstack stuff with Netlify. So I'm gonna deploy exactly the same site to Netlify now, which I believe we already have provisioned. Netlify site, sorry, Netlify site. There we go. Hello world, doesn't have anything yet. So I'm gonna do npm run export, making sure I have the latest code and content in my out folder. And then I'm just gonna deploy it to Netlify straight away, and then we'll have our site in there. Export is done. And then I'm gonna do Netlify deploy it to prod and give it the folder which to deploy, and it starts uploading to CDN, and we're live. So if we go and refresh the site, we now have exactly the same site, but served from Netlify. And the difference here is that my API should be functional now. So if I search for album, you can see the request is hitting, it's a local request, but it's proxied back to the Sitecore server. So Netlify makes it super easy. It's just a matter of specifying which request you want to proxy. So I'm proxying, actually rewriting this to use a proper term. So any /media will be rewritten to our blob storage. This could be image capable CDN instead. All /deals is actually proxied back to my Sitecore instance that I'm tunneling through ngrok. We'll talk about that in a second. Sitecore API, this is what runs my Sitecore services client. My search is proxied back to my Sitecore instance. So instead of deploying Sitecore, I just have an ngrok tunnel running. And that's why it works. So it deals with all of the course issues, and that's how I can retain dynamic API functionality on the site that was statically exported. So if you have like a managed search engine that you can actually bypass querying Sitecore server completely, like Covea or Algolia, then you don't even have to go back to Sitecore. But some implementations still rely on Sitecore kernel and context to actually service a search query. So this could be an interim thing you do before you decouple search functionality. Now, how about this whole security thing? So let's try to log in as, what are these usernames? I forgot. Log in as Cam first, and then I'm gonna go to the deals page. And you can see deals page work because I'm proxying back to the Sitecore server as well. So I got my auth cookie from the login page. I'm using Sitecore services client to log in, and I get my page rendered as is because it's still serviced by Sitecore behind the scenes. So here you can kind of combine both static and dynamic, and you can see the delta here between time to first byte is pretty significant, 240, because this page is still rendered on my Sitecore instance, while the album page is rendered in 13 milliseconds. So these are hybrid scenarios you can do with this pattern. Another pattern is that if you actually want to include this page as a static page, but re-render this component by going back to Sitecore, you actually can. So logging in as gem again will give us the new auth cookie, and this page will render all 3 deals for us. And then if I want to actually go and fetch just that component, we also have the rendering service API. And this allows us to go and request just HTML for this component, and it will be rendered on the Sitecore server side. So you can actually initiate this call client side, show some sort of nice placeholder, bring this just that particular component with sensitive content back from the Sitecore server by asking for page ID and particular rendering ID, and then render this HTML client side. So there's multiple options here available how to do this whole hybrid transition to Jamstack. The last thing is forms. I'll just show you this real quick because I don't have much time left, but forms is really a important piece of the puzzle. Because it's an MVC rendering, it just renders as is. So in the static context, you still have your Sitecore form. If you ever seen the Sitecore form, this beauty of the set of attributes here, it's recognizable. So what it does, it's trying to post to form builder, and form builder is an endpoint running on Sitecore. And this piece is very peculiar because it's protected with CSRF, and that token will not be valid. So runtime call to this endpoint will fail because this request verification token won't match. So we cannot really do this on the Jamstack way without disabling this functionality, which you can. So that's kind of one option. This allows us to post back to form builder and collect the data. However, we can do something more fancier. We can go completely serverless on this. And what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna rewrite the form action. So instead of posting to form builder, I'm gonna post to a serverless function. And this allows me to essentially take over all of the form data collection process as a Lambda function. So Netlify allows you to provision these functions really easily. And this is exactly what we're gonna do here. So first I'm gonna create a folder called functions. And this folder will have one file called form.js. And this will have one export, one handler that will accept my request. And as it will be doing something with the body of that request, it's gonna parse it, extract all the form data from request, and it's gonna do something with it. Maybe it will submit to a backend. Maybe it's gonna post back to Sitecore behind the scenes because it's a serverless function. Do whatever you want here, and it's gonna return success to 302 to go to thanks page at the end. So it's sort of like we simplified it a little bit, just for me to demonstrate the approach. Then I'm gonna need to tell Netlify where the functions are. So I'm gonna add this particular attribute, the build setting, and then I'm gonna create a redirect for my function. My redirect will take /API/form, and it's gonna proxy it back to the Netlify function itself. And that's it on the Netlify side. For us to override that form action attribute, we actually have HTML processing API here, which I can use. So I can import HTML processing instruction. I'm going to create a new instruction to handle all of the form tags that has an action starting with form builder. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to rewrite it to /API/form. And finally, I'm going to include this into one of the attributes of the uniform context provider. And what this will do is I'm going to rerun the build. It's essentially as the MVC rendered form are being processed and converted to React during static site export, all my forms will be updated with these required attributes. And this means that if I go to out contact, this is my newly generated static form. So if I try to find action, here's my Sitecore form, but now with action attribute rewritten. So I haven't changed anything on the Sitecore side. I'm just adding different HTML processing instructions here, and I'm gonna re-upload this site to Netlify, and hopefully it's done. It's done. I'm refreshing this. Let's submit George Costanza at Crimerica, and we got our thank you page. So form is submitted, and we actually see the we can witness this in the dashboard with the serverless function called forms being available, and you can see we log out the body of the request here. So that's sort of shows that function executed ran for 3.5 milliseconds. So that's kind of how you can start decoupling dynamic functionality using all of the modern stuff, but sort of retaining a lot of the existing investment that you have. The very last thing I have is personalization. I'll just quickly show it. This is actually a public URL. You can actually hit it yourself if you wanted to. So I'm gonna clear off my application storage and refresh it. So this is a familiar Habitat site. And this site is deployed statically with our personalization capability that allows to retain personalization that is configured in Sitecore. We haven't even changed Sitecore personalization conditions. So check out what happens. First of all, performance of the time to first byte of this page, because it's cached by Akamai, 46 millisecond time to first byte. That's pretty good. If I go and visit features section, go to my demo feature, then go back to home, notice this feature layer personalization has changed. So this component, this particular tile is now re-rendered because I hit a feature profile. So I'm matching one of the profiles. The uniform tracker is handling all of that. Configuration is still stays as is, and you get outstanding performance characteristics. So pretty low time to first byte. And why it is important, this is the last piece I want to show you, is the delta between what happens when you have a remote visitor somewhere, in this case in Mumbai, India, making a request. This is what happens with requests when you're not caching it on CDN. So the time to first byte for the Sitecore page is over 2 seconds. So that's nothing actually starts happening before that page is delivered. So there's latency involved, there is server-side processing involved, but you can see this timeline, how severely affected the timeline is just by the page not being rendered fast enough. And I don't even, this is not even enabled with XDB and Tracker. This is the same request being done with cache hit, and you can see the time to first byte is 62 milliseconds. So, and see how the timeline shifted. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff to optimize downstream, but you can see how the timeline shifted from like over 7 seconds page load to 2.8. And this is without touching any of the front end fonts that are loading here. The big MP4 loaded here on load. So this is a good start. This is sort of the fundamental piece that you need before you can start touching CSS, images, fonts, and all the other stuff. So that's pretty much the tour. There's a lot that I showed you, and this was intentional to spice up interest. If you wanna see more, happy to do like a more of a deep dive for sure. And yeah, you know how to reach us. There was a doc site that we recently launched with a lot of this stuff documented, so check it out. And yeah, I know I ran a little bit late, my apologies. So hopefully that was entertaining.
Oh, this was great, Alex. Thank you very much. I haven't seen this in-depth demo of Uniform before. This is really good and makes a lot of sense. It's mind-blowing how fast you can get your site rendering using the edge delivery. It's amazing.
Yeah.
One question that I have. So with Sitecore moving the next JS way, what is going to be the uniform's differentiator?
Personalization, decoupled tracking. That's something that is not available now. And it's a really tough to sort of say no to that, as we've been selling as an industry personalization for a decade, right? And that's, so all the edge logic and everything related to that, that's our secret sauce. We had to build our own Next.js plugins, and we also have Nuxt for Vue.js developers. We had to do it because there was a obvious innovation vacuum in Sitecore for a couple of years in JSS land. So you cannot go to Jamstack without static site generator. But this is just a starting point, right? Once you cross that bridge, then you start needing an answer for incremental export, which we do have. So that's another major differentiator. And MVC being able to actually tell the brownfield story that you can reuse what you have. I mean, we have customers launching SXA sites with this. So they handle their server-side performance scale problems and then incrementally handle the front end optimization, right, as you need to. That's the story that we can tell. And yeah, it's all about the edge, man.
But I mean, my point to it is, of course, I'm mixed there, right? So commerce is one thing, but I mean, this really puts to the spot why use Sitecore. There's no reason to use Sitecore specifically if you want to achieve these things, right? Where do the clients really gain from using Sitecore?
I think there is still a lot to be said about a stable, familiar content management system that that is able to do things other headless CMS systems may not be able to do now. So if you compare apples to apples, Sitecore still has the depth and the ability to pretty much handle any content management use case that is known, right? You can wire up whatever integration you want. You really can turn this into your own flavor of content management system that works for particular business. So I think there is a lot to be said about it, and I think it's about sort of like what Jamstack is in my mind is the old music hits, sort of cover songs like on old hits, right? So same ideas of static site generation. That these are not new, but new tools, new concepts. So similar things, powerful psycho power without the drawbacks of scale and performance. This is what we're focusing on. So you can still configure a lot of these things in Sitecore, but they offload the execution. But we'll see how the marketplace shakes out. It's there's a lot of interesting players in the content space, and CMS are being sort of reborn. If you guys haven't seen Sanity, it's a kind of very similar to Sitecore system, but like built a decade later. So if you want to kind of see the go through the interesting trip of seeing similar concepts being reborn in new shape and form, that's an interesting platform to look into. And we'll see what's gonna come out of Sitecore in this content space. But I think there's still a lot of reasons to.
I know. I was putting it on the edge, right? I mean, you've been to Sitecore also so many years, so it's like the story that you always sell Sitecore on is personalization, and how many clients is actually using that? Right? It's the same. Is it like 1%, 5%? If I'm happy one day, then it's
Why do you think
expensive.
that
And then it's really,
that is?
really expensive to use Sitecore for a pure content management system,
Mhm.
not using personalization, right?
Well, in personalization, there's multiple reasons why companies start and fail, right? It's costly, it impacts performance, and sort of they don't know where to start. So there's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
so many
There's so
reasons,
many.
right?
It's not technology thing. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So making it a no-brainer that you enable personalization as in a matter of minutes without really thinking what it was gonna cost you and whether your architecture or infrastructure can handle it. That will be a nice enablement, right? Enabling factor to do more personalization. And then probably it's all on strategy side and like trying to understand what you want to use personalization for as a starting point. Probably focusing on something that is achievable, something that brings business value. So a lot of that is just talk and not really something
Not
meaningful.
technology. I agree. 100%. Yeah. It's just so sad sometimes. Like it's always the story, and when you go out to the clients and nobody ever used it, right? It's Anyway, that's another talk. Agree.
Yeah, it's I've gone in, ventured into other platforms, and I really encourage everyone else to go outside of Sitecore. If you've been stuck in the Sitecore bubble for a while, and take a look at other platforms, see what's out there. Sometimes you'll see amazing things, but a lot of the time, what I saw was just really, you guys are just you're using these older technologies. I mean, Adobe's headless game is way behind Sitecore's. I mean, there's just so many platforms that are still using legacy approach to things, and they're limited in many ways where, you kind of look back and, and it starts making sense in a way. Some are good at certain things, but a lot of times you see a lot of things that you would assume the world would have caught up to by now, but it just hasn't in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with Alex. It's there's definitely a lot to say about Sitecore, even in the XM form. It is an expensive typewriter for the web, XM form, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, and typewriting, that's something that's, and being on the consulting side of things for over a year, that would became clear is that nobody is using CMS for the actual content creation, right? Content, it's a copy paste target that is there to assemble pages and run your presentation logic and some sort of business workflows related to content, but like look into rich text editor like experience that is a default rich text editor experience. It's definitely not built for people that do any writing, but it's a tool in between of your visitor and your creative, right, and your content. So it's something needs to fill in that role. But it's interesting how it's really CMS changes, and that just what CMSs are used for is being stretched quite far, and it's sort of like industry being reborn again in that space.
Certainly. I remember when I worked on the SharePoint project, that was before my Sitecore time, we stretched that SharePoint installation so much. And then I can't remember what the problem was, but we got on with Microsoft, and Microsoft's just like, you did what? I didn't even know you could do that with SharePoint.
You can't.
Sometimes we have these conversations with product teams and with support folks, and like, wow, you guys were able to stretch the XDB to take that kind of load, or performance, on the commerce side of things, we were able to optimize some things. I think a lot, we actually had a conversation with someone from another agency recently, and we were talking about, again, performance and the issues with performance in SXA and how much JavaScript and below, that comes with it. In a way, yes, but at the same time, there's also an argument for, look, SXA is a framework. It's a toolbox, right? Let's say it comes with certain functionality and it works a certain way. It's a turnkey solution, right? The idea is you install and you theme it, drag and drop the components. You really don't want to get into the nuts and bolts of customizing the SXA. You're going to get into the can of worms. But if you are theming it, I think it's also up to the partner to make it clean. So a lot of partners, what I notice is they, for instance, when they create a theme, they overwrite CSS. So instead of cleaning out the CSS and then adding their own, right, they're simply adding more CSS on top of what's already in the SXA. And then recently we had a project where the size of the CSS files was 6-7x. I mean, it was megabytes. It was like 10 megabytes CSS. It was just a nightmare. And they were thinking, where's this coming from? Well, I think part of the responsibility also lays on the solution partners to guide clients in the right direction. It's one thing to use a plug and play tool, but Sitecore is an enterprise platform. Some things are turnkey, but some things are pretty complex, and that's why solution partners like us are around. This is our job to make it work and help it to get it to the right place, even though it may not be out of the box. That makes sense.
Yeah. But the foundation, I'm not sure how performance SXA foundation is without any, like adding partner code will definitely, there's cost associated with any change, but what's the cost of the bare bones site, right? Just default theme, a couple of jQuery based widgets and all that stuff. Can you get to Lighthouse 100 just with bare bones site?
No.
And if you can do that, like, where do you go from there, right? So,
yeah, I agree.
I mean, there's powerful concepts there in SXA right around content sharing and that, like, extensions that were made for Sitecore that should be in the product at this point, right?
Yeah.
But all the front end stuff, like, it's hard to keep up with all that, and I don't know. The presentation layer evolves like every 5 years. You probably want to rebuild it anyways.
Yeah. So Alex, do we have any guys from Rackspace, trying to hit you on the street with a gun or something? I mean, we have so many clients where clients pay like 30, 40, 50,000 a month cost of just hosting. Sitecore installations is expensive, right? I mean,
I have Eastern European mafia protection.
You're killing them now.
Don't get me started on the hosting. I wrote an article, a blog post on
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy when you think about it. It's crazy.
And for a static site, probably 50 grand.
No. That's e-commerce site. So yeah.
Okay.
Made it way more complex. I know that, but yeah.
I think this is really going to hit home performance wise when Google rolls out the vitals in May. I think people are going to really start paying attention, because right now it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's nice. Performance is important, but I don't think brands truly understand how important it's about to become.
Once they end up on the third page in Google, they will, right? That's
exactly. It's one, yeah.
But it's hard if you. This is sort of like one. Like if anybody's looking into where to diversify skills and where to kind of grow, the whole front end performance is such a new interesting world. Like the amount of demand there is in professionals that can come in and optimize. Some of these consultants, they even charge per a millisecond, like for metric, let's say one of the vitals, or
Yeah.
there's so much demand in that. So
Yeah.
if
And
there
it
is a
makes
path for
sense.
Sitecore, is this.
Wow, amazing stuff. Well, Alex, thank you so much. Great presentation. Pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me.
One quick question, Alex.
Yeah.
So what does a typical adoption look like for Uniform? Do you guys just provide the tools and then documentation, or do you guys also help with the infrastructure setup and all that stuff?
It's all free. It's all free.
Yeah.
No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking.
It's typically per engagement. So we have enablement team that can be a part of the project planning architecture together with partners. So we don't do the builds implementation. So we have partner network that we have through which we enable partners and they built on top of this toolkit. But for first projects, we usually, depending on complexity and comfort level, Jamstack, we may do some hand holding and some, maybe a POC, maybe enablement here and there. That is beyond documentation. So we have a few folks that are good at that, ex-Sitecore and know Jamstack really well. So, but it's not our model to build solutions with this, for sure.
And is your pricing model, is it like a subscription thing, or is it just a kind of contract based on the initial project? Is it sales of the, what is the, maybe what I'm trying to get at, if we're trying to adopt this for a client tomorrow, what do I need to tell them what they should be looking forward to?
It's pretty much aligned with Sitecore's subscription model, with those tiers, whatever those tiers are. So it's based on sites, based on traffic, visits, and sites, visits. I think that's it. But yeah, hit me up. I usually don't handle any of the business stuff. This is just from what I remember. I can give you a more accurate answer. Yeah, you don't want me be in sales. I'll give everything away for free.
Exactly.
Hey, you were trying to sell me on JSS back in the alpha days. I don't remember if you remember at PIMCO there.
Yeah.
you're trying to sell it to me there. So you're a good salesman.
That was a few years ago now.
Quite a few years ago.
Well, thank you. Any other questions from anyone before we wrap this up? All right. Well, Alex, thank you so much. Thanks for joining, guys.